Solar PV modules are a local source of power, of course, but the manufacturing and delivery of those modules is a complex global business. Today, we're talking about all the issues impacting global solar PV module shipments and sales with MJ Shiao, head of U.S. business development and marketing for LONGi Solar. So LONGi is the #1 global producer of solar modules by a fairly wide margin. And we're going to be getting into everything like the WRO, the ABCVD petition, and all that. But first, I wanted to start kind of at the top of the perch here to get your sense of just the state of the market at the high level that LONGi's at.
It is certainly an exciting time to be in the solar market. On one hand, we have just unprecedented levels of demand. It's crazy to imagine just, in 2020, the pandemic was happening, and then 1 year later for there to be one of the largest growths in solar PV deployments globally in the history of the industry, right? And this year, we're going to continue to see record growth, it seems like, at least from the analyst forecast, where we might even see 200 gigawatts installed globally. Then at the same time, you have all these supply chain shocks, everything that's, hitting commodity markets that's affecting everyone in their day-to-day lives. Those are things that are also affecting the solar manufacturing business as well. So it's been a wild ride.
So looking back at last year in 2021, U.S. Customs started to detain module shipments at the border under the Withhold Release Order, WRO, aimed at silica-based products made by Hoshine. So can you talk about what's happening with the WRO now and how Customs is evaluating supply chains?
I do think the solar industry has taken a leadership role in addressing kind of the concerns that are involved. To say at the outset, LONGi itself has a strict code of conduct. We uphold basic human rights and are compliant with all U.S. regulations for imported products. But the fact remains that Customs has broad discretion over, how to stop goods and, how they're going to ensure that, they are compliant. The WRO was new, and for both, the industry, of course, but even for Customs to start to look at, the solar supply chain. So there's been a lot of learning on both sides, what expectations are, how to look at the solar industry, and frankly, just how to, just seeing that the solar industry, I think, was prepared for some of the inspections and things that the Customs is looking for. That being said, a lot of diligence is needed by those that are buying modules, of course, importers like LONGi that are actually bringing those modules and manufacturing those modules to ensure that they're compliant with what Customs is asking.
To your point, it definitely sounds like there's a lot of learning on both sides, the solar side and the Customs wrapping their arms around everything that they're trying to look for and how to best get at it. So what should residential and commercial installers and, I guess, larger scale buyers be sure to do to provide the transparency needed to comply with the WRO as you understand it now?
Well, the biggest thing is that Customs is going to work with the importer of record, which generally in the U.S. market is going to be the module supplier, right? And so buyers need to be working very closely with their suppliers. First of all, has that supplier done its due diligence in terms of where it manufactures goods and what does it know, how to trace the goods throughout its supply chain and its supplier's supply chain, right? How much cooperation does it have further upstream in the supply chain than perhaps where that supplier sits? Also, what's the team at the supplier that's actually going to be working on this? How prepared are they to respond? How are they going to organize themselves to actually respond? Because it is quite a involved process.
How might the Forced Labor Prevention Act play into future shipments and this issue going forward?
Just broadly for the solar industry, it is an opportunity to bring more transparency, more solidification of processes into kind of what Customs is looking at. I think the industry has done a lot of its own homework, has done a lot of work in preparation, and perhaps this is a way that we can bring our findings and work with the folks at for example, Customs and Border Protection, who are also looking for ways that they can efficiently administer this new law we can come together and find a path forward that makes sense. Obviously balances the priorities of what the law is trying to prevent, as well as making it clear for business to continue smooth and efficient operations all around.
There's another pressing topic right now, with Oxen Solar is asking the Department of Commerce to investigate whether Southeast Asia-based companies are circumventing the anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders on cells and modules from China. It's a mouthful. So this is the latest ask, which is different than previous attempts here. The petitioners now citing entire countries instead of specific companies, and adding Cambodia to the list of countries as a part of the petition. There's a lot to get into here and a lot of ramifications, but I guess I'll first bluntly just ask, do the petitioners have a point?
We don't think so. At the crux of the petition is really an assertion that Southeast Asia cell and module manufacturing, those facilities are in fact, quote, minor and insignificant contributions to the creation of a solar module. And I think this is just like, on the face of it, just completely untrue. Those facilities represent, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars of capital investment, real skilled workforces that are working at those facilities, a lot of groups that have set up those facilities in a way to, be leading and, globally leading facilities. So it's just really disappointing to see, what is intended to be trade protections being used in a way that, I think is ultimately, first of all, going to be ineffective, and secondly, punishes companies that are, truly investing in, innovative solar products and supply for the U.S. market.
If the Department of Commerce does agree, though, what, in your view, would the ramifications be in the U.S. solar industry specifically?
Part of this is that the ramifications are fairly dire, and it's not even whether the Department of Commerce agrees or not, but simply by taking up the case, by initiating the case, they create a ton of risk for anyone that, touches the Southeast Asia cell and module supply chain. If Commerce ultimately rules that there is circumvention in this case, any tariffs would be backdated to the date of initiation. So suddenly you create a ton of liability for anyone that is importing modules or cells from those countries. And the challenge, of course, is that makes up most of US module supply. Certainly there are a significant number of Southeast modules, but also when you add in Southeast Asia cell supply to US module assembly factories, you're talking about somewhere between 75 and 80% of domestic solar modules that are used. If you suddenly lock that out or tariff it or just create, incredibly uncertain risk, that is going to have the unfortunate side effect of just completely cratering deployments for the US solar industry.
Do you have insight into how long the process would play out? I mean, it looks like this week we'll be getting notice of whether they, the petition is rejected or not. But I guess if it's not rejected, how long is this period of time that we're looking at?
So we're looking really closely at this March 25th deadline that Commerce has to weigh in on whether it initiates or not. We certainly hope and think there's a lot of, practical as well as legal arguments for why they should reject the case. However, if they do decide to initiate, the process is quite lengthy. Not to take too long on this, but then that's when Commerce is going through and looking at these suppliers, these facilities in Southeast Asia, and they're digging through the data. They're going to see how much money has been spent on CapEx, on operating costs, on all sorts of contributions, and they're going to look at the source of that, whether it's, as the petitioners allege, whether that's from China or whether it truly is from within the countries or third-party countries, right? So that's a huge data problem that takes a long time to resolve. This thing will take, I think, around a year ultimately, and so that's a lot of time to essentially cast a giant shadow of uncertainty over what is critical module supply.
Well, I guess we'll see if everything we just talked about is moot the 25th or not. Maybe that was a waste of time we going over it, but I do think that regardless of how this turns out, that incentivizing US-based solar manufacturing is an important thing personally. And the US government under 2 administrations now has decided that tariffs are the way to go about it. Because the Biden administration extended the Section 201 tariffs on imported crystalline silicon solar panels and solar cells, but with a few caveats, and that they will start only above an annual 5 gigawatt tariff rate quota. And the next tariff period will start at 14.75% rather than 17.75%. And bifacial panels will once again be excluded. Okay, so I assume you're not a fan of the tariffs, but do you think that that the Section 201 tariffs at least are working as intended and spurring US industry?
I don't, and you're right. We're not a fan of tariffs, and even before my time at LONGi, I think I've been pretty well on the record as tariffs not being the best way of encouraging U.S. manufacturing. I mean, I think just looking back at the history, we've had tariffs for over 10 years on solar cells, solar modules, 201, AD/CVD, Section 301, and our domestic module supply is still, I think, latest I've seen is around 20%. And even that is, consisted of module assembly, not even, polysilicon. Well, there is polysilicon manufacturing, but not like wafer and cell manufacturing, for example, in the US. The tariffs have not really encouraged US manufacturing. And at the same time, they've raised the cost of solar, which makes it more difficult for solar ultimately to compete with traditional traditional energy sources, and that's to the detriment of the industry and obviously the detriment of the climate.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. So what alternatives should we be seeking instead?
The idea of US manufacturing, I think, is a noble one, is a good one, and it's important for the US if it wants to be a industrial and energy leader in this century. I think the better alternatives to this, instead of using tariffs, is to do what other places do to encourage manufacturing or to support domestic manufacturing industries, which is to look at incentives, right? And there's a strong package of incentives, for example, in the reconciliation bill that seems to be on life support right now, but that is more comprehensive, and it looks not just at solar modules as representing manufacturing, but looks at polysilicon, cell, wafer, but also inverters and racking as well. Plain realities is that there are geographies where, frankly, it is just easier and less capitally intensive to set up manufacturing operations. And if the US wants to play and be a leader in this sphere, it has to, one, bridge the economic gap between the two, but also, and this is frankly in the reconciliation bill too, it has to stop playing cute with demand incentives too, right? Because we are now facing another upcoming expiration of the investment tax credit, and what manufacturers need is long-term visibility. We need to know that that demand's going to be there. The 10-year investment tax incentive, calms a lot of fears about, hey, next year, is there going to be some crazy policy that suddenly the solar market drops and this, facility we invested hundreds of millions of dollars into, is that still going to be viable or not?
And definitely the other thing to consider here is the top tier of module producers is separating from the pack, shipping more than 160 gigawatts of modules in 2021, which is more than 90% of total demand. So with the supply concentrated so much with the top 10 producers, which is only seeming to concentrate more and more, what other market pressures should we be paying attention to that might be affecting pricing and shipping over the short and long term?
We truly are a piece of the global economic puzzle, right? But that also exposes us to a lot of headwinds that are going to hit us at a larger scale, again, as an industry. So you're going to see a lot more funkiness in commodity markets, things like not only like polysilicon, but glass, encapsulants, even fundamental metals. They've been bouncing around, and as they get tight, obviously the price goes up, and that increases the cost of manufacturing. And that's, again, affecting manufacturers regardless of what geography or what scale you're at. Things like freight, shipping things across oceans is capacity is tight, costs are way up. This will continue to affect both foreign manufacturers like those in Southeast Asia, as well as domestic ones, because a lot of the bill of materials for module assembly still come from Asia Pacific. I think this is part of why you see the top tiers separating from the pack, is because folks like LONGi have the scale to deal with that. We can have more direct relationships with ocean line carriers. We can use our purchasing power to help create more price visibility, more price certainty, or at least just have a sense of visibility that we can communicate to our customers and say, hey, we expect this to happen, and be able to have that benefit, the partnership that we have with our customers.
And speaking of visibility, a key global PV issue is drilling down into true sustainability and making sure the modules and the system components are manufactured as cleanly as possible. So what steps is LONGi taking on that front?
Great question. So, I think a lot of us sometimes think, hey, we're working for the solar industry, so we've done our good for the world for the day, but we want our products to also be made sustainably as well. And, for LONGi, this started from our, founder and chairman who, had this idea about solar for solar, using renewables to actually produce solar products. We've set aggressive goals for ourselves. For example, we have a goal of being powered entirely by renewables by 2028. And we're almost halfway there already. We've got a lot of exciting initiatives, for example, where we'll have our first net zero carbon plant in the works by I think the goal is still next year. So we're getting there. There's still definitely a lot of work to do, and as we all know, in the decarbonization space, it's sort of that last 10-20% that's the hardest.
We covered a lot of ground today. There's a lot going on, a lot more that will go on. And I guess just thanks for taking the time to chat with us all about it today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for a great set of questions.